Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Navigating NewSpace, produced by the Matthew Isakowitz Fellowship Program. For any new viewers this week, the Matthew Fellowship is a highly selective mentorship and summer internship program which nurtures the next generation of leadership in commercial space. My name is Shayna Hume, and I'm a 2018 alumni of the program and one of the hosts of this segment, where we interview fellows, our executive mentors from host companies, and other affiliates of the program to help show what role the fellowship plays in the careers of young leaders in commercial space and help keep you up to date with the rapidly changing industry that is NewSpace. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Tim Buzza. Tim Buzza brings more than 30 years of influence in space exploration to his work advising Relativity Space's management team, helping structure and scale the fast-growing company for success. He guides the team on rocket design, testing, and launch site development, and has helped secure the right of entry at Cape Canaveral. Before advising Relativity, he also served as the Vice President of Launch for Virgin Orbit, where he led program development for LauncherOne. Before that, as VP of Launch and Test at SpaceX, he helped grow the company from 10 to 3,000 employees, established launch sites on both coasts, and oversaw development of Falcon 1, the first private liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit. Tim holds an MS in mechanical engineering from Penn State, and he volunteers as a mentor to local engineering students and holds multiple patents. Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to spend the next 30 minutes talking about rockets, one of my favorite things. And NewSpace is exciting, as you know, and so thank you for having me.
Absolutely. The day job isn't enough. We have to keep talking rockets into the evening.
Yes, we do.
So to kick us off, would you mind telling us a little bit beyond the bio? What brought you to commercial space and to the space industry in general for your career?
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a straight line, as most people know when you progress. I actually grew up in Pittsburgh, and that was one of the furthest places that you'd even get exposed to rockets. It was mostly steel mills and heavy duty industry. And I worked in my dad's machine shop and eventually found my way to Penn State, which was great, and got exposed to engineering. And at the time, I just wanted to work on aircraft. So I took my first job after graduating school with McDonnell Douglas and worked in Long Beach on all kinds of fun projects, the MD-11, the C-17, learned a lot about system engineering, learned a lot about aerospace. And then an opportunity arose just south in Huntington Beach to work on my first rocket program, which was the Delta IV. And the Delta IV is quite a rocket. It taught me a lot about how to deal with the structures with ISOGRID, how to deal with these rocket engines with hydrogen and oxygen, how to test them, and et cetera. And that's where I really got to know some great folks. One of them was Chris Thompson. He was somebody that I worked with at McDonnell Douglas, which eventually became Boeing. And he ended up being one of the early employees at SpaceX with Elon Musk. And so Chris called me and said, hey, why don't you come up here and see what's going on? I did. I ended up interviewing with Tom Mueller, who was the head of propulsion. They needed somebody to help set up their testing of their rocket engines. And so that was my beginning at SpaceX. That was in 2002. And in the discussion of early commercial space, that's about as early as you can get. Yeah. And there wasn't a lot of it back then. There was some, of course, companies like Orbital. There was other startup companies that some didn't make it. And so there's a long story with SpaceX. If you really want to read the first 6 or 7 years, read the book Liftoff by Eric Berger. It tells the story in about 300 pages, and it's quite interesting. So, you know, the story at SpaceX was just, you know, small startup to where they are today. I spent 12 years there from 2002 to 2014. Lots of stuff we can talk about a little bit later. And then left and did another startup with Richard Branson. And it was originally Virgin Galactic, and they wanted to add on sort of an orbital launch vehicle. And so we developed that. We bought a 747, which happened to be named Cosmic Girl. And we learned how to attach a rocket to the wing. And I left before they did their first orbital launches, but as you've seen in the news, it's worked quite well. But then after that, I met a young guy who wanted to 3D print rockets, which I originally was intrigued by, but thought he was crazy. It's Tim Ellis. And Tim Ellis is fantastic. If you ever get a chance to meet with him, he has a really an awesome vision that's different than most of the new space companies. So a lot of new space companies are trying to start with a smaller rocket, get to a bigger rocket, find out how to compete in most cases against SpaceX, which they're 20 years behind. And so that's quite a difficult challenge. And then some of their vision can extend to maybe deeper space, maybe the moon, things like that. But Tim Ellis has always had the vision, as Elon did, to do something with Mars and to do something to contribute to making life multiplanetary. And so he wants to build the application layer that is going to enable this whole new manufacturing method through 3D printing, through artificial intelligence, and really the autonomous factory. So that's what's happening at Relativity.
That's amazing. And when you say application layer, could you explain what that means a little more?
Yeah, I guess maybe like, somebody developed a program called Excel, right? And then Excel lets everybody make all their spreadsheets. And so the application layer that I'm talking about at Relativity is those three elements I talked about: 3D printing that is is fed with artificial intelligence to improve itself, that then allows like autonomous robots to build things. So we certainly can't be building things on the moon, well, in space, on the moon or Mars or elsewhere, the way we build them on Earth. We can't have giant factories with hundreds and hundreds of employees just to build things. It's just not sustainable or feasible. So we have to, it's a lot of efforts going in, with Elon and Starship and folks thinking about how to actually transport their land and transport back. We now have to think about what are we going to do when we get there. And you see these images of large sort of Martian cities, and it's like, how are we going to build that? We're certainly not going to transport it there like the ISS. Look at the size of the ISS and how long it's taken us to build that, and that's in low Earth orbit.
Yeah,
right?
The cost per kilogram to Mars is ridiculous.
Yeah, so there's no way. We have to find a way to use in situ raw material and have autonomous ways of mining it, turning it into something usable, into 3D printing.
So is there a fairly large ISRU team at Relativity, and is that a kind of big internal focus?
Well, it's you always say you got to start with the dream, right? And so your vision. And so Tim Ellis brought that vision, but it doesn't mean that we built up that team. Like, we didn't want to spend the money on that until we started to learn some of the fundamental things, right? The fundamental things is, can we really 3D print at scale, at a large scale? And so we spent the early years just really trying to develop, as everybody does, the metallurgy, the processes, starting to build small things, prototypes, and build bigger things. And then, I have a saying that says, you're not really an orbital rocket company if you don't get a rocket to orbit. Kind of sounds obvious, but it's not sometimes. Like, I think when you're doing a lot of these startups and you look around at everybody jumping into the game of doing orbital space transportation, the goal is to get to orbit, and certainly SpaceX did it a while ago. Rocket Labs has done it. Certainly Virgin Orbit has done it. Others are close. Firefly's attempting it, Astra. You can go through the list. Some haven't even gotten to the launch pad yet. So the important thing is, to me, and the vision that I tried to talk through with Tim Ellis, is we got to get something to orbit so that we can show people that 3D printing can print a rocket that can get to orbit. Right? You can say, hey, this stuff's great, but if it doesn't work, then they're not going to believe that it could be the factory of the future on Mars. So it's really a step function where we needed to build a small factory, prove out those elements I'm talking about with the application layer, and then do something really creative with it, like launch a rocket to orbit. Yeah. And you need to do a smaller rocket because you need to make your mistakes and your learning at a smaller scale and not burn all your capital. So that's what Terran 1 is all about. Certainly Terran R is out there as the next bigger rocket, but really, you had asked before, what is the vision in 10 years? It goes all the way back to the application layer, and it's bigger than just rockets.
Yeah, you brought up some great points. 10 years ago, the only people who knew multiple names of orbital space companies were probably already in the industry. And now many of them are permeating the news, especially the financial news outside of our little section of the world. You might have some really great insight into what makes these new startup companies more likely to succeed. You've seen 3 different companies start up and grow to rather successful places. What enables them to find their little niche and to do something, and what sets Relativity apart in that way?
Okay, I'll try to capture as much of that as I can. I think
whatever strikes your fancy.
Yeah, it starts with crazy smart kids like yourself, and I mean that sincerely, in the sense of you are given the tools, at a degree level, and certainly as you get advanced degrees, and the type of tools I'm talking about could be simple things like the way that I saw a C-17 getting designed with 100 draftsmen working on ink on vellum. Like, that's crazy. That was in the late 90s, right? So most people can't even imagine that something as sophisticated as a C-17 could be built that way. And CAD was just coming out, and certainly other elements of doing analysis, and the way that CAD and analysis now sort of is one, and the way that designs are more organically created through computers and so on. It's dramatically different. That's one side of it: the tools, the technology, the computing power. I think the other side of it is once somebody shows how to do something once, for example, SpaceX put a Falcon 1 into orbit, and then all of a sudden those fundamentals become more transferable. For example, like, people start to know how to obviously do the things that only large aerospace companies knew, the Boeings and the Lockheeds, and other countries, China, Russia, Japan. People started to learn, wow, we know how to now build the tanks, we know the manufacturing methods, we know how to build engines. Lots of companies are building rocket engines now. It's not just Rocketdyne, or Pratt and Whitney. And so I just think each company is both the people are organically moving between all of these startups. So certainly the experience base is coming up fast from successes, and the sort of technology of education and the tools that people are using. The last thing that is surprising is the amount of funding that's now being generated. I mean, as people know, the story of SpaceX was we raised $100 million, or Elon had $100 million, and we spent all of that, and then there's a story that goes along that. So it was hard. That was back in 2008. The market was down. Nobody was investing in space. And you look at today, it's amazing how much private money is going into these new space startups.
Where do you think that will lead for us? Do you think more startups are going to keep saturating this market?
It's there's only so much capital, and then that capital will start to react to successes and failures. Okay, so it's going to work itself out in this capitalistic environment we live in. Yes, there's a lot of there's a lot of investment going into a lot of companies, and I hope they all succeed. I'm not one that wants to win or succeed at any company by a failure at another company, whether it be a financial failure or technical failure or otherwise. I would rather win on the playing field evenly with everybody. And so I hope that all these investments pan out, and I hope it really feeds the market. I know it's funny, some people have said to me, why would you even do a space startup? Look at SpaceX, they're just going to dominate the industry. And I'm like, a couple things in my response to that is that SpaceX isn't necessarily, their vision isn't to just go launch everything into space. It's to get to Mars and to be make life multiplanetary. So their focus is going to be on that. Now they need to make money to do that, and so they will certainly try to find ways to sell rockets and do things in space. But it's sort of like Tesla. Like, Tesla had the vision to go make all cars electric and have that be one way that we reduce our carbon footprint. But they knew early on they could never build enough electric stuff, whether it be cars or trucks or other heavy equipment, buses. They knew that they needed other players to get involved around the world to make the whole vision come true. And I think the same, same story exists in space, but we have one different thing that makes this difficult, and it's called ITAR, the International Treaty and Arms Regulation. Kind of makes it more difficult to collaborate worldwide with rocket technology. As we know, it has had an early history. Its birth was not necessarily for the greater good of humanity. It was doing something else, trying to destroy humanity. And we're not only sure if that technology gets into the wrong player's hands, that'll come back to haunt us. So I do think one of the challenges that we have to work on in space is how to share this information and build up, a space community and start to getting into more space law, like universal law, like not shooting rockets at satellites and creating a large debris field in low Earth orbit. I mean, I think that woke a lot of people up around the world about, wow, this is a little bit of the Wild West in space. And I think it's going to need some regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. You're certainly not the first person that I've talked with on navigating NewSpace to talk about ITAR, to talk about the problems that involves, and especially all the tie-ins that you just mentioned to space debris. We live in a world with an increasing amount of complications.
Yeah.
Those, I guess the way I would like to ask this is, we know about space debris right now, and we know about ITAR. We would like to find ways to make space more international, allow more people to connect on it. But even as we begin to find solutions on these, there are definitely more problems on the horizon that we aren't quite fully aware of yet. Are there any that you're keeping an eye on that you think might have a big impact, especially on the next 10 years as the Artemis program continues to develop and launch?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Let me think for just a moment. And certainly the one we touched on previous is the biggest, like how can we truly collaborate? I think when you're talking about just interplanetary stuff, like going to Mars and needing to work universally on sort of like the International Space Station, how about the international base on Mars? I think that's something that we need to shift towards. I think the technology for that should be able to be outside of ITAR and just like maybe we can just leave the transport part of this, of this thing we're thinking about doing, going to Mars and other places to inhabit it. Maybe we can just leave the transport part under those regulations, and there's a small number of players, sort of like SpaceX and Starship and whoever else that follows the regulations to do the transport part. But I honestly think in the end, it's one of the first things we need to do, but it's not the hardest or the most like the most voluminous thing that we'll need to do in the future. And that is something that, is why at Relativity, to circle back again, that more and more people need to start thinking about how we're going to build the base on Mars and how that is going to be sustainable. And so I do see a path to have collaboration worldwide for these missions, especially, the missions on the moon, the mission to Mars, et cetera. But, I guess on the other side, you were asking, like, is there any other big things coming up? I mean, certainly we're working on the Starlink thing with, if we start putting up giant mega constellations, and it's not just SpaceX, it could be Kuiper, it could be, there's 3 of them planned, that are out there that could get pretty crowded. And then you have this incident of space debris. So I certainly think beyond learning how to navigate the Wild West on Mars or the moon, I think we're going to have to start with low Earth orbit and figure that out, and then push those policies outward.
Yeah, you make some great points there. And thinking about the infrastructure work that Relativity is going to do beyond Earth is really interesting, because not only do we have to get there, we have to be sustainable once we arrive. We have to make it something so that our investments aren't just a one-time arrival. That's going to be really interesting. Has your role at Relativity been diving into that at all? Or maybe could you expand on what projects you're helping Relativity to push forward?
Yeah, I mean, the first 4 years was all about starting a company and working with Tim Ellis and Jordan Noon to build the team. And when I look at the team there, and you had asked some things about some big moments in getting through commercial space. I mean, I have my list, but it started with Dream the Impossible, and that's talking about going to Mars. But then the second one was surround yourself with people who have the talent, the passion, and the drive. And so that was the first thing on the list with Tim and Jordan, was we got to go get a bunch of great people, which they have. And I've been really excited about working with them on that. I feel like a bit of my recruiter, but it's really about gathering like minds in the industry to coagulate together. And then it's about, I dove in for about a year to prove the technology, like just looking at the metallurgy and running the 3D printing group to see if this was actually even going to work. So it started with, should we, what is the company's purpose? Tim and Jordan had raised some money, and so there's always fundraising going on in the background. Then it's hiring great people. It's proving the technology that can lead to the vision, and then it's other things. Like when I first joined, I said, you better go procure a launch site at Cape Canaveral, and they were like, oh, that's going to be a few years out. Why do we need to do that now? I says, because they're disappearing fast, and Relativity has Launch Complex 16, And if you really look around Cape Canaveral, having spent a lot of years there, there isn't like, it's not like there's 10 more large lift launch pads just laying around empty that you can go procure. I mean, I think there's almost zero left. And I think the only one that will come up in the future is probably Launch Complex 37 when Delta retires. And then that's about it. And so that is one of the problems with new space companies, finding places where you're going to launch. It doesn't seem like it should be at first, but we only have 2 major spaceports, right, on the east and west coast, and they're kind of full. And frankly, Vandenberg is really sort of missile defense oriented, and it's not gone as big commercially as Cape Canaveral. So I worked on that with Relativity. It seemed not the most important thing, but as we look back, it really helped a lot. And so once the team got together and we proved the technology, I will admit I stepped back and let that group run with it, and they're doing it. So I'm really in a position of just when they have issues that need solved, or other recruiting efforts for leadership, or some future thinking discussions. So it's really just jumping in where I can help them where they need it. It's not anything specific at the moment.
Yeah, what you said about the launch pads is really interesting. I don't think a lot of people realize how scarce a resource that is. Do you think that'll have an impact on any new actors that come into commercial space as, orbital launch companies?
I think for sure. I mean, you see companies doing extraordinary things like, for example, Astra going up to Kodiak. So I spent a lot of time launching a Falcon 1 from a remote tropical island on Omelek in the Marshall Islands, and just logistics is something not to be underestimated. Moving propellants, people, parts, rockets is very difficult. Like it's not what rocket scientists want to do, and it's not as easy as you think it should be.
And it's not what we're best at.
Yeah, and so Astra has, I'm sure, had their struggles with that. I had mine. That's why we got back to East and West Coast with SpaceX on Falcon 9. We went to Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg, very strategic. And then, other things like when SpaceX was looking for, when Elon and I were looking for where we're going to do Starship, we were like, we got to stay on CONUS. We cannot go offshore. Like, it's just too painful for something that big. And wherever we build it, we got to fly it. And so he said, go to Texas and drive as far south as you can. And that's Boca Chica. And I remember standing on that beach. It was basically a swamp, and thinking, wow, this is going to be Starbase someday. So that's that one, but that's a very specific trajectory. You have to fly, there's only like one little way to thread the needle to get out through the what they call the E sub Cs, the casualty analysis for flying your rocket with the FAA. So I look at companies that are starting up, and it's going to be a difficult thing.
Yeah, not only crowded orbits, but crowded launch pads as well.
It is, and I think some of the new companies' only alternative pushes them to do things like try to launch off a barge. And when we talked about that early on at Relativity, I call it, let's not think we can do miracles in series. And what that means is our first miracle is going to be to 3D print a rocket from scratch. And so we just should focus on that, not figure out how to launch an orbital rocket from a barge. That's not actually fundamental to the vision of the company, right? And it was just avoiding going to a federal range. A lot of people are scared of going to these ranges, but once you've worked there for years, you learn how to get through the regulations and how to work with the folks who are there to do it. It's actually way less work than inventing a new way to launch a rocket.
Wow. That's super interesting, and definitely a topic I don't think many of my peers have dove into quite as much. That definitely brings up some new concerns for the next 20 years that will be super interesting to see solutions for.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about spaceports around the U.S. and around the world, and people like Virgin Orbit going over to England and doing a spaceport, and et cetera. And they're in other countries, but they're very difficult. And what makes it so much more difficult with rockets is you just can't go to foreign countries because of ITAR.
Yeah.
So it's so restricted on where you can launch, where the technology can transfer to. Even if you decide to go all the way out in the middle of the ocean and go to the equator, like Sea Launch, right? Sea Launch was a collaboration of 3 different countries. It was a Russian rocket, a U.S. program, and then a Norwegian, oil derrick, and they had tremendous difficulty just with that, just because of ITAR.
Yeah. complications abound, but that's rocket science.
Yes.
Rocket science is sometimes the least of it when politics
Not always a rocket.
involved. Let's change tack for a minute. I was really curious. You've definitely been, I think, on the MIFP mentor roster for a while. How did you get involved with the program originally?
Well, used to work for Steve Isakowitz at Virgin Galactic and then Virgin Orbit, and we collaborated a lot on the LauncherOne and the fundamentals of the program, and even transitioning to starting up a new division at Virgin called Virgin Orbit. So we worked a lot together. He ended up leaving and going to aerospace, and then shortly after being there, he just sent the email saying, "Tim, I'm starting up this foundation. Would you be interested?" And of course, the answer is yes. And every year since, the answer has been yes. And I think every year that I can continue to do it in the future, it'll be yes.
Yeah, for Steve and for the Isakowitz family, basically anything like we were talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, for that, for sure, but really for the students that are looking for how to connect the next dot, like, you know, they have so many great questions, and they're looking how they're going to navigate this next period from maybe transitioning from school through internships, fellowships into their working career.
I've definitely talked about this on previous broadcasts, but my 2018 fellowship was a huge turning point in my career. I was able to work on technical stuff before that and gain work experience, but getting to actually talk to the people who are in the startups and on the ground floor, it was a game changer. I could find out what was happening in real time, and I think the more students that have the exposure to that, the better.
Yeah, and I can't agree more, and I'm happy to hear that's the experience you took from it. I hope that all the students I've worked with take away the same thing. But you know, I think it's 30 students, and I think, you know, the Brooks fellowship is, maybe it's 30 students, and I do look like I also do some other things, like at Penn State they try to pair up students each year with a mentor, and I think it does got to continue to be broader than that. I think folks are learning, and universities are learning, at least. I talk a lot with the head of mechanical engineering at Penn State, Karen Toll, about how they can expand it at the university level for all students. It's just something, even if it's not as intense as a Matthew Isakowitz or a Brooks. And I do think that, you know, I always said when I was going through college, I didn't have that exit mentorship to transition me, and I didn't really feel like I had enough hands-on experience. That's why I did my master's. And so anytime I'm talking to universities, I'm like, I think you really got to emphasize in that last year or two more interaction with industry, unless you're planning to stay in academics. That's fine. More interaction with industry and more hands-on experience.
Yeah, definitely. And with the proliferation of programs, you know, Z Factor, Patty Grace Smith, a lot of these fellowships are sometimes getting people their first internship. Especially as applications are coming in, a lot of people have only had COVID experiences for a good portion of their undergrad. And so now these fellowships in the upcoming year are going to be bringing people back in person into the workforce, which will be really exciting for them.
It is. I feel very lucky I didn't have to go through that as a student transitioning it during these last 2 years. It can be incredibly difficult. I do have a daughter who's now a sophomore at University of Texas, so I've got to experience it at least secondhand, but close to firsthand through her experience, and it's been difficult.
Yeah. So I guess on that note, one question that I kind of wanted to close on, and maybe we can take a few minutes to talk about this, but everyone is focusing on the role of young people, young professionals and young students in commercial space. And a lot of it is making sure that they get the experiences to make an impact at an early age. From your experience looking at the startup industry, which is certainly skewed a little bit younger and faster in that way, what do you think the role is going to be looking forward of this next generation? What impact are they going to have on commercial space?
Wow, it's going to be huge, I think. I think it's going to be one of the biggest influencers of what's going to drive commercial space to, you know, in these next, 10, 15, 20 years. It's like I started on earlier. I think that the students are coming out with that passion, with the tools to do the job, and they're creatively thinking, and the way that they work together in teams is amazing. I'm seeing it firsthand at Relativity Space. It's something that I've watched kind of change from my days at SpaceX to Virgin Orbit to now Relativity, and it's accelerating. It's not just, you know, sort of a steady stream of students coming in, starting their career and progressing for 20 or 30 years. It's a game changer. So I'm pretty excited about where space is going to go, and I do think that the next generation coming in is going to be key to that.
Yeah, I can't agree more. You know, something that we've found out through running this broadcast for the last 2 years is that a lot of our regular watchers actually end up becoming fellows. They watch and they listen and they learn, and then they start networking. So I'm always kind of looking out to see who's commenting and who's paying attention. If there are any students who aren't able to apply yet, maybe they just haven't hit the age range for the Matthew program, since we have a bit of an older requirement than most, starting at the end of undergrad. Is there anything you'd say to those students to help encourage them on getting involved?
With the Matthew Isakowitz Foundation?
Or all of commercial space?
Oh, wow. I can't think of a more exciting place to start your career. I mean, my nephew was graduating computer science out of Purdue, and he was heading into one industry, and now he's in the NewSpace industry, and he feels such a great sense of purpose. He may have been working in financial markets, and now he's working on the next generation of space vehicles. So I'm certainly very passionate about it. So any students that I can steer into this industry, if it's right for them, it's not right for everybody. But if they start to feel they have a passion for space, then I help to steer them there. And that's what I think all the mentors are looking at with, you know, with the students we get to talk with and work with, and whether they're graduated or not, or even new hires that we work with in the companies, you know, that I've worked with, and continuing to make sure they're thriving. You know, that's the main thing when you're either mentoring or you're a manager or a leader. It's you know, they're not there for you, you're there for them. And I mean, your job every day is to make sure that they're have the environment and the tools and the passion to do great things. And I've seen it, and I've seen students grow into some of the greatest leaders. I'll use one specific. I had an intern. His name was Zach Dunn. We worked together down in Texas, and he was just as green as you could get. And he eventually took my job at SpaceX as VP of Launch, and he's currently running the major part of the program at Relativity Space. So it's just fun over 20 years to see somebody that essentially is going to start like all of the students that are here listening and at that, you know, junior, senior level, and thinking about getting into space. It can turn into amazing things.
That's incredible. Tim, well, I've only heard the best things about you as a mentor. We appreciate so much everything that you give to the Matthew Fellowship, and for speaking here tonight to any of the students that are listening live or to the recording later. We appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And it was a pleasure. And I hope to meet you in person someday.
Absolutely. I would love that. It was a pleasure, Tim. Thank you so much.
Have a great night.
Have a great night. Bye. The Matthew Isakowitz Fellowship Program applications have already closed for this year, but whether you're a fellow who's still waiting to hear back on their application, or whether you're just a viewer who loves learning more about commercial space, you can feel free to connect with MIFP via our website or via any of our social medias, which are normally at Matt Fellowship. We would love to talk about the program or about commercial space in general. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of Navigating NewSpace.